Chris and I have had parallel paths in the sense that we kind of connected professionally at a very early stage in both of our careers. And we've managed to create our own versions of success in our sort of individual lanes. And thankfully, we constantly kind of come in and out of each other's lives. I wrote a little intro here. You guys all read the intro in the email, but as an indicator of who Chris is, we met back in 1997. Out of the blue, he called me because he had a conversation with a music publisher that was considering signing me to my first publishing deal. He called and asked me independently, do I have a lawyer? And I said, no, not really. And he said something to the effect of, well, now you do, and introduced himself. And that was about 23 years ago, and we have stayed very good friends ever since. I consider him to be a mentor of mine. He managed me in the early part of my career for about 3 or 4 years, and we have always been able to be very honest with one another. And there was a point where his career path was going one way and mine was going another way, and we separated from that perspective. But we still kept in touch professionally on many levels. We would get together and strategize over breakfasts at, what was that place called, Chris? Was that the Patrician? Is that what that place was called on Queen Street?
I forget what it was called. It was a really old, well-worn, greasy spoon right next to the Horseshoe.
I certainly was. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we used to meet there like 7 a.m. Like literally, we would be lined up before the door would be open so that we can kind of do it and strategize. And I really actually loved those at that time. We would actually travel to LA together, and because we were on budgets, we would share rooms together. And I've actually always been really blown away by Chris's spirit and his entrepreneurial vision of how to make the music industry better. Anyway, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here today. And we're grateful to have stolen an hour of your time with how busy you are. So I really appreciate it. Chris, would you like to wax about your own career for us a little bit?
Well, I went to law school 87 and 90 years and years ago, and then I was in a recording group from 90 to 95, and that was really my apprenticeship in the business. Coming out of that music experience, 96, finished school and then started practicing law in Toronto, music law. And then really wanted to be the attorney in Toronto that would help you get out of Canada. And back in that time, there was no real internet. You couldn't find bands by, surfing the web, as we used to say. So you'd have to physically go to New York or Los Angeles with a wallet full of CDs and run around town, meeting with different A&R people, playing the music. And that's really where I cut my teeth in the business, really built a lot of relationships with industry people, ended up getting a lot of Canadian recording artists record deals in the United States. Somewhere in the middle of that period, one of the first acts that I was shopping was Nelly Furtado and Maverick. I had both demo CDs in my bag, and Nelly took off like a rocket. Literally everyone wanted to sign her, and Maverick was a little bit more difficult. We ended up doing a really big record deal for Nelly in '99 with DreamWorks, and then Maverick we ended up doing a demo deal, I think with Warner Brothers first, and then we did we went through that whole process. Demo deal would be where the label's not quite sure, they like what they hear on the demo recordings, but they want to develop some more and do some recordings. So we did 3 songs with Warner Brothers. That took about a year. They passed. Then the band moved to London, England. Did a demo deal with Island Records when they were over there. Same thing. Did some songs. Island passed. Then they moved back to Los Angeles. We did a demo deal with Virgin Records. Same idea. Did some recordings. Did a showcase. Virgin passed. And then we ended up doing a record deal with Restless, which was a punk rock label at the time that had always been pursuing the band. We did a record deal with them. Album was finished in the can. The album was going to come out in a month or so, and the label called and it informed me that their funding had been revoked. They were funded by Regency Film at the time, and this was 2003, 2002. Just on the edge of Napster. And they said, "Look, we're not putting the record out. We're kind of going out of business." I lost it. It's probably the most upset I've ever been on a professional phone call, and decided to start my own record label at that point in 2003, 2004 with our mutual friend Donald Tarleton. And so started Last Gang Records to put out the first Metric recordings in 2004. And this was supposed to be kind of an art collection to show my law firm clients how cool I was, because I was still shopping records. And, in the US, I did the 3 Days Grace deal. I signed a band, Billy Talent, a group called Hot Hot Heat, Sam Roberts. Sort of 2002, 2003, I was getting a lot of bands signed, but couldn't find a deal for Metric. So I decided to put their record out on Last Gang. And then the same thing sort of happened with this group called Death from Above, 1979. I didn't think, no one wanted to sign them. We put the records out. It sold about 250,000 copies. Same story with Crystal Castles. Those were sort of the first 3 signings on Last Gang. So what was supposed to be a little hobby label became a business with 12 staff and distribution all over the world. So I had 2 lives. I had sort of my law firm life with Nelly Furtado and Avril Lavigne, and eventually Drake walked into my life in 2008, and he kind of swallowed me whole. Went on the Drake train pretty much up until I joined eOne in 2016. I started talking to Darren about this eOne job in 2012, and sold my law practice. I sold Last Gang to eOne and moved in to run their music division in 2016. That was a longer story than I thought I was going to tell. But
it's funny. This is one of those strange things that we're like, yeah, say everything you want. And the next thing we know, we're like, oh my God, we got 10 minutes to go. So no, this is amazing. Really appreciate it. So when we work together, I don't know what it is. We've talked about this. I feel like I was one of your first 5 clients or something. I was definitely up there at the beginning, I would say.
I started practicing in February of '97. It took about a year to really get anything kind of going on. And you're definitely in the inaugural class.
Well, I did my publishing deal. We did our publishing deal with BMG in '98. So there you go.
Oh, yeah, that makes about sense.
So one of the things that I love that I actually always took a kind of a note out of your playbook was, and I know that you actually got a lot of heat, because I started to get heat for this in Canada, which was people coming to you and saying, why are you taking all these tremendous Canadian talented, tremendously talented artists and stopping them in the US? What about us? And we would get that a lot. And there was actually some clients that we were working on together, as you recall, that, Canadian labels were passing, we were going and getting American deals for, and then they were getting pissed that we were going and getting American deals for them. And I know that you were sort of kind of going against the grain. I mean, how aware of that were you at that time, that you were thinking, well, I'm putting my clients first, but, am I shooting myself in the foot in my sort of own home backyard, right?
I was never cultivating record companies as clients. I think that happens a lot more in the United States with my US music lawyer friends. So I didn't really care what they thought. I knew I was on their dartboard in their private meetings, but I wanted my clients to have the most success humanly possible, because a wealthy client is a good client. and if you look at the Canada really suffers. It kind of stinks for Canadian record company executives, right? I mean, they really haven't been able to sign and launch an artist globally in 30 plus years. I mean, maybe since Bryan Adams and Celine Dion, all the, I mean, especially now when every artist from Lethbridge to St. John's, Newfoundland, you can find them online. But even, back in the day, U.S. record label people would fly up to Toronto or up to Canada if there were hot Canadian acts, and they would sign them for themselves. We haven't been able to export Canadian talent successfully from a Canadian signing model, unfortunately, and that's not a personal statement. That's mathematics.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean, we even had a couple of situations together where there was artists that had a significant amount of U.S. interest, and then all of a sudden the Canadian label came in and wanted to be a partner, and kind of really soured that deal opportunity for us. We don't have to mention names because this is going to be rebroadcast on YouTube. So, but we know what we're talking about. One of the things that I always admired about your approach, but also it always frustrated the hell out of me about your approach is the same thing, which is you were never about a hard sell tactic. If you had something that you loved and you believed in, you went to the wall for those things. But I remember vividly having conversations where you said, if they haven't hit us back, it's not a good sign. It doesn't mean that they want to do those deals. And yet you never really pushed it, but you have been so integral in being a part of so many significant artist careers. And I don't just mean like successful one hits. I mean like literally transformational artists. So what was your approach, let's say, when Drake comes in the room and you start having conversations with him? Because also he came at things a little bit of a different way, right? He was kind of like a TV star. And at that time it was kind of like, it was a little bit like kind of cheesy that people were crossing over from TV, and yet is probably one of the top 5 most influential hip hop artists of all time.
It's funny, if you remember with MySpace, they used to segregate all the artists, and they'd give you a really nice research list, unsigned or independent Canadian artists. And there was a list of them. There'd be like 20 there. And I'd say to all my young lawyers, I say, Monday morning, you look up the list, you call the first 5 and see how they're doing. Like, get into their lives, find out what's going on. People care about these acts. And Drake was always on the top. And I'm like, what is this like Degrassi sweater wearing rapper kid? Like, what's going on with this guy? And I'd ask our teams every week, what's going on with this kid? And then out of the blue, he ended up calling me through 40, who was, a real believer and worked with him from day one. 40 at the time was working a lot out of Chris Smith's studio. And Chris was the manager for Nelly Furtado. Chris was my manager back in the early 90s. And 40 knew me through the Chris Smith kind of Nelly Furtado world. So when things started happening with Drake, I got the phone call. So I wouldn't suggest with him that was something that I took a huge risk on, or I went to the mat on. I always thought he was like really, really impressive in meetings, like as I got to know him, and really, really talented and really, really driven. But it wasn't like Metric or Nelly Furtado or 3 Days Grace, where like when I started working with them, nobody cared. People cared about him, and he was already kind of a lap around the track. I always remember him saying, "Hey, I'm putting on a mixtape, and I've got like a release party tonight." And I'm like, I'm not going to a mixtape release party for, like, what am I going to go that for? And then it was like people coming into the office the next day. They're like, "Oh my God, LeBron James was there." I'm like, what is going on? Like, there's stuff going on. And I was just excited to be part of the ride.
Well, I mean, you were part of the ride for basically many years. So So you have a tremendous amount of success. You're basically the Pied Piper. I always thought he was the Pied Piper of the Canadian exported artists. They all sort of went through Chris's, through your office, in one way or another. And
except for a couple that I really loved. Michael Bublé, Nickelback. Those, love both of them, but had nothing to do with them.
Well, you can't win them all, buddy. Sorry, I still.
Although I did shop Nickelback at Meet-Em in '97. I had some Nickelback demos through a contact of a contact of a contact. But
don't give up hope. I'm sure that if they hear this, they might want to work with you. So I believe in you. I think you have a bright future in this business, Chris. So fast forward. You and I always, by the way, I always did have to say I was really impressed, although it sort of contradicted something else that we were doing. But I was always impressed with how you basically built Last Gang out of sort of necessity, really believing, talking about going to the mat, really believing in your artists, and of course, Death from Above and Metric became extremely successful artists within their sort of unique lanes, super influential. And so, I mean, obviously you did well with that. So then, of course, Last Gang expands into not only being a label, but also being a management company and being an overall multi-vertical company, which kind of sets you up nicely for what you're doing at eOne now, right? But before we talk about eOne, if I can go back, how did you, what were these sort of intrinsic values that you saw in artists that made you believe in them? Because as lawyers aren't typically the creative hub of the music business, right? They're the deal makers. But you kind of took that role on as well. So what were those things that you saw that maybe applies to even artists today? What are those special X factors that you can discern?
It's a bunch of things, back in that time too. I know I sound like an old timer here, but back in '97, I mean, you get CDs from people and they'd pile up on your desk, and maybe every second Saturday you'd go into the office and you go through 100 of them and just listen. And Donald Tarleton calls it the tingle, and I liken it to that as well. It's like stuff that I like, I think other people are going to kind of like, and that's it. First and foremost, it's got to be songs. I always think it's amusing when people come to my office and say, hey, this person's 7'4". I'm like, I don't care. Press play. Let me hear the song. You got to start with the song. And if that part's working, a lot of the other pieces become important. Who's the manager? How do they perform live? Some of these other things. But the song is instrumental. I remember hearing Gavin Brown brought me 3 Days Grace, I Hate Everything About You. My head exploded. I'm like, what the hell? Amazing job he did with that group, by the way, because I heard the earlier demos and my head did not explode. Nelly Furtado, my head exploded, so it's kind of instinctive and kind of guttural to start with, but then it does become a little bit about math and science and figuring out who the team is around it and what's going to work. And let's be clear. I mean, I think people love to remember all the things they were right about, but I've been wrong about a whole bunch of things.
Well, we won't talk about those so much. But so I want to sort of transition, because you kind of touched on it right there for a quick moment, but I kind of call it like Moneyball, the Moneyball music business, right? Which is yes, you need that, that sort of that feeling, that tingle, but where does, in your mind, the metrics of it meet the tingle? And is that what makes an artist special? Or, I mean, especially when we're looking at TikTok now, there's so many things that are reacting on TikTok in 15-second bites. And I'm actually starting to see that convert out of TikTok now into sort of more, traditional ways that users consume music. Are metrics, not metric, but are metrics still, are they important? I mean, where does that line?
I think the way we look at it now, because we're sort of in we're in an interesting space, right? We're not a major label like Universal, Sony, or Warner. But we're also not like indie, working out of our house with 300 staff and 15 offices around the world, and we're part of a multinational toy and game company. But we sit in the middle. We sort of sit where that BMG Concord kind of space sits. And I think everybody's looking at the same list. All the research is all the same. There's 100 acts. There's no secret. And the big guys or women are going off after those top 50, and they're throwing piles of cash at it and just filling up the pipeline. Where we're looking a little bit more is like, let's look at number 51. Let's look at number 86 and see if there's something to work with in and around there. So that becomes the money ball, the kind of like the science puts them on the list, but the tingle kind of helps some graduate to the fore, and would be things that we would be looking to work with.
So how would you recognize? I mean, how do you, just generally speaking, for you with what you're doing every day at eOne, how do you recognize those opportunities? You have a staff of people, right? You have, I mean, maybe talk about the structure of how you guys work, because eOne is not, it's not a record label. It's a very, very multi-integrated company. There's film and TV, there's music supervision, there's music publishing, of course. There's, I know there's management. There's a management component that you're really trying to work out now. Like, how do you recognize the opportunities, and how do you work with people to bring you those, those opportunities, the networking effect?
Yeah, we're just quickly, as part of Hasbro, Hasbro bought the company late last year. So Entertainment One is the entertainment piece of Hasbro. Currently, Hasbro has they make Monopoly, Transformers, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony. So they're a toy and game company with an entertainment component. Now we are decidedly the entertainment component to that. And within that entertainment component is a film and TV studio, a family and brands business that make things like Peppa Pig and PJ Masks, and then a third segment, which is the music and live division, which I oversee. And within that music and live division, that's divided into 4 parts. So we have a traditional music recording business. We have a music publishing business. We have an artist management division, and then we have our live division. And within the recording silo specifically, I think I mentioned earlier, we're unique this way in that we're cross genre. So we do everything from gospel to heavy metal. We'll win Grammy Awards in both those categories often. And each one of those silos has a business head who also in all cases and is kind of the A&R head at the same time. We did our group call, A&R call this morning. So there's about 12 of us all together. Dual Tone, which is a label under eOne, have like Lumineers and Mount Joy. We have a whole gospel department run by this woman, Gina Miller, out of Nashville. Last Gang exists and continues, so Chris Moncada is running that. So each one of these silos have their own kind of like creative areas in terms of A&R, how, when, and where they're finding acts. There's a lot of shared services in terms of accounting, royalties, finance, all of the HR, all of that kind of stuff. But those creative hubs are all finding music in similar ways.
So, well, I mean, until you win a gospel metal Grammy, then I don't think you've quite figured it out. But it's great. And would you say that that's like what would be, like, in your mind, what would be some sort of ways that artists can make those impacts? In other words, how do you get to being 51 to 100 on the sort of like the radar list? That's not even a real thing, but we kind of are talking about that. Like, what are some sort of strategies to kind of ping the radar?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I should backtrack a little bit. I mean, that list is primarily Latin pop and hip hop. Maybe some R&B kind of in there as well, maybe a little bit of alternative, but it's the, sort of super streaming kind of stuff, categorically, that it's the 15 to 22-year-old listener who's listening on commute while they're doing homework all day, every day. They're listening to this independent music that's getting up on the radar. For an artist that's maybe more in the gospel kind of laneway, or the heavy metal kind of laneway, that ends up being a little bit more kind of word of mouth. So, I mean, it sounds trite, but be great. There are a lot of things you can do independently. Make music, put music up. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be too precious. Build an audience independently. And today, more than ever, I mean, I know people always used to say this, when you and I were starting out, but now it's like people will find you. There's no more, there's very few kind of undiscovered artists. If we're hearing about somebody, everybody's hearing about it on an industry level.
Well, I think it's funny because back in 1997, we, you would sort of like a demo. You would maybe go see but you'd find a time to go see the band perform or the artist perform. There's a process now. I mean, you are sort of, you are tried and convicted within seconds these days, right? It's like, oh, I heard about this band. I listened to it on Spotify. Don't like it. Next. It literally could be that quick, right? So, and actually, I think something that I'd like to ask you about, because I'd love to get your perspective, because I know that Spotify and DSPs and some of these things in YouTube and TikTok can be tremendous tools for discovery for you guys, right? But obviously, the other side is that they're nefariously unfair to songwriters and to creatives, right? Notoriously. So the question is, how does somebody who's an independent artist look at Spotify, look at it as a way to establish themselves and create credibility, while also sort of feeling like they're suffering from being unfairly paid? I know this may be a bit of a heavier question, but do you have a thought on that?
I mean, I tell anyone who thinks we're being unpaid that, if they were in the music business in 2006, that's what it felt like to be unpaid or not paid. We're doing better. We're doing better than since 2015, we're doing better every day. I think unfortunately for people who are not playing in that sort of 15 to 22-year-old genre, and I've got two boys here that are in that world, right? All hip hop all the time. Maybe getting outside of that occasionally, but just like running the streaming numbers up through the sky. If you're not in those laneways, it's a little skewed against you, the game right now, unfortunately.
So let's say you're not in those laneways, and one of the things that we are talking about doing is you before you jumped in, and I was just going to say again, you guys, we're talking about creating an open source music library for everybody. And if you want to sort of hear about it, just put your email address in the comments on the side, and Zan will take that down and we'll hit you up directly on it. But of course, there's also, and again, where eOne I think is really maybe even more successfully than a lot of other companies is kind of merging their opportunity into sort of singular streams. Like you have the management and the label side plugging into the film and TV opportunities, right? Like there's a sort of a synergy. So I mean, are artists sort of having significant success through film and TV placements? Can that motivate and push their careers?
Absolutely. It's a key pillar for marketing plans, sync licensing. And we've worked really hard at building what I call our music services hub, which is run by a woman, Maria Alante. So she oversees music supervision, composers, soundtracks, sync licensing, our library music, and brings all of that together and makes it available for our content producers. So we're making we're making film at eOne and across Hasbro as well. We're making TV, we're making family and brands content. We're doing 100 and, Hasbro will do 150 commercials a year, all of which use music, in addition to Dungeons and Dragons trailers and video games and everything else. There's just a whole bunch of music being used at eOne. And I do think we are the best situated company currently to take advantage of all of that and really be a synergistic unit. I have 75 examples of how that's working currently. And I think, I see Sony maybe doing this to a degree. I think the other majors find it difficult because they don't really have film and TV studios attached to them anymore. And then any of the independent companies are not necessarily part of a film and TV studio the way we are either. So I think we're able to offer more opportunity in that world than anybody else.
If you were to quantify it in terms of slots, right? Like, let's say each song represents a slot in a television show or a film or a video game or a commercial. How many slots are being filled, would you say, give or take, on an annual basis through eOne? Let me rephrase that. I don't mean slots that you're filling. I mean, how many slots are being searched for across all of the eOne properties?
Oh, I would say, I don't know the exact number, but it would be thousands a year. Yeah. I mean, we look at, do you know the TV show Deputy?
Yep.
It was season 1 on Fox. We were music supervising on that. I think they would have licensed about 55 songs throughout the season, original songs in addition to score. And you multiply that by on the unscripted side, I think we have well over 70 unscripted shows on the air currently, using music all the time. It's a lot. It's one of the big reasons I like this eOne opportunity. Everyone said, oh, well, they make film and TV, so they'll use all your music. It's like, okay, it's easier said than done. But we've put a lot of work into building that bridge to our content producers and trying to make that a reality. But
that doesn't mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that doesn't mean that 100% of those slots are being filled 100% of the time by eOne content.
Oh, no, not at all. No, right. And you don't want to be that provider either. If we're in the music supervisor's chair, we're not going to tell a showrunner, guess what, you're using all eOne music all the time. We won't get called back again for that job. So it's a gentle balance. We do have 400,000 master recordings in the catalog to choose from. So chances are we've got what you need, unless it's something specifically outside the realm of what is contained in the catalog. But it's a gentle balance. You want to serve the creative first.
Like gospel metal, for example. You don't have enough of that.
Everybody's looking for it. It's the next wave.
Yeah. I think that Lil Nas X is doing a record. Again, guys, don't forget, please put your questions in the side. We're gonna get to that in about 10 minutes or so. Where does an artist start today? If in other words, if you were to somehow flip your career around and you were to go back to shopping artists, where does that artist start? How, it's like, what are some early steps that they can adopt to ping your radar? I know that we talked about that earlier, but is it working social media? Is it what are your thoughts?
I always say, it drives some artists crazy, but there really are 1,000 things, and I think if you can tackle 24 of them, that's pretty good. We probably help you get to maybe 124, but there's so many tools. I think developing, in this day and age, developing the live presentation and really having human connections with people one-on-one. We can see how that still really separates you from the pack, and will have an impact with people. But I would not, I would never discredit the power of a song. It's at its core, a song changes everything. And if you're neglecting that, be open to collaboration. If it's not working, if you've written 72 songs and nobody cares, you start working with somebody else. Move around and work with other people and try to find solutions. Because I think most artists want to impact and have as many people as possible hear their music. I think it's collaboration. It's songs.
It's again, as you guys know from attending these conversations that we do on Fridays, we don't really push the MDIIO thing. It's really just about exposing smart people like Chris and hearing their ideas. But of course, one of the best parts of MDIIO is that you can actually create projects and discover new potential collaborators within the platform, which is actually really important for us. It's a way to connect the community. And one thing that Chris was saying, which I would certainly echo, is that networking and relationships are so important. Look, Chris and I have been, in and out of each other's world for basically 23 years now, which is wild to think about how quickly that's gone. But also the thing I love that you said, Chris, is that I think as the business evolves, it's still the song. It's still the song is still the common key metric to whether something is going to be great or not, isn't it?
Absolutely. I went, last year around this time, we were in New York with the family, Mother's Day weekend, and we had the Friday or Saturday night off. And I was looking up in the New York Times. We were in New York, and I was like, oh, Billy Joel's playing Madison Square Garden. Oh, that'll be funny. 70th birthday. Let's go check that out. And we sat there like our whole family singing every single word. And this is, I think he described himself as, this is a roly-poly bald guy, hopping around on a piano, and people, 20,000 people losing their minds at Madison Square Garden. And it's like, songs.
20,000 people losing their mind 10 nights in a row at Madison Square Gardens.
Yeah, well, he does one night a month at MSG, right? Every month for the last 10 years or something ridiculous. So that's spectacular.
Multi-generational artist. I mean, we saw him at Hollywood Bowl, and it was the same thing. It's very rare. In fact, I mean, just before we get into the Q&A, who just sort of like a fun question, who to you, I know you're going to say Drake, beyond Drake, who to you are sort of, do you see as being future multi-generational artists that are out now?
Oh, wow. Someone who might be, someone that might be in that sort of younger than 25-year-old area.
Let's say an artist within the last 10 years that's going to have that sort of, that let me put this here. I had this debate with somebody who actually happens to be a Billy Joel maniac. And he said, there's nobody that's going to be like that. And I said, I disagree. I think Ed Sheeran, for one, is going to absolutely be a multi-generational career longevity artist. And he's like, well, no, you're crazy. He's like, I'm like, no, man, you are totally wrong. I think Bieber is that person. I think they're out there. But
he's already there. I would say those guys are both potentially on their way if they keep up the consistency and the, great music. I'm a big Childish Gambino fan. He might fall outside that 25-year-old area, but I just think that guy is like a quadruple threat and so important on so many levels. Kendrick Lamar,
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. I totally think you're right. I know we're getting some questions. Can we jump to some questions?
Yeah.
So as you guys know, please, this always seems to happen where questions come in slowly, and then we start taking the questions, and then they just start flooding the chat box. So Zan, let's get it moving. Chris, please meet Zan. Zan is the woman in the crowd who has all of the questions.
Hi, Zane.
So the first question is from Narcissus. He asked, how can a songwriter send unsolicited material to a publisher rec company without a representative?
I know on our front, we have submission emails on our website. I'm not sure, across the industry these days how people are doing that. A lot of music companies, and many people have probably figured this out. I mean, the email setup is very similar addresses. They just change the names attached to them. You can get to people that way. I don't know what different company policies are, though, on accepting music if it's coming in kind of anonymously at this point. I think the better route than just sending things out kind of indiscriminately with people you haven't met before is focusing more on something that Justin's alluded to: collaborating, networking, getting to know people, getting in the right rooms, and working that way.
I mean, I almost think too, if I can just sort of like elaborate on that, it's almost like, look at it almost like a video game. Like, succeed on level 1, go to level 2. Succeed on level 2, go to level 3. And to me, what that means is, collaborate, write great songs, be a cool person, people talk about you, and then you kind of graduate to the next level. And then you kind of leverage those successes accordingly, right? And don't be annoying, right? Like, don't walk up to Chris Taylor at Canadian Music Week and say, oh, I want to, you remember back in the day when you'd have like literally leave CMW with like 100 CDs in your bag or whatever? It's like, don't be that person, right? Pick your shots. And also, I think, you said something earlier that is so true, which is really, if you're going to send your music out and put it out there, believe in it, right? Like, in other words, make sure that is the best representation of who you are, because that might be the shot that you get, and that might either open the door or close the door. I remember it might have even been you early on in the days when I was trying to shop things that you didn't think was great, and I probably was a egotistical young person that thought you were wrong, but it turns out you were probably right, which was, I think you said to me something like, so what, we're going to send it to them and now all of a sudden it's the same crappy song just mixed better, or something. Like, maybe weren't that harsh, but it was something to that.
You have a memory like an elephant.
Unfortunately, in a stomach like one.
I still listen to those Nelson songs, though.
Oh yeah, there was some good records. In fact, if you wanted to shout out any of the ones that kind of got away or didn't happen, are there some artists that you were just like, God, I cannot believe this didn't happen for us?
Oh yeah, I had one of the, getting to my point about you don't talk about the failures that loudly, but the reality is we signed early days at Last Gang, we signed a group called Panurge, which I thought was a mixture of Air meets everything cool. Like, I just thought it was like a guarantee, and still go back and listen to those recordings, and I think I was right. That's the thing. After you have a bit of success, you start to think you're right about everything. I had a good run there for a little while, but sometimes things just don't come together. So there's lots of those.
I remember a funny meeting that we had. Of course, Chris and I have had a little private joke over the years. Beep-boop or deep-doop. And we'll just send an email to each other and we'll just say deep-doop in the email, and we both know exactly what we're talking about. But we had a really funny meeting where we were playing some music for I'm not going to mention names. We were playing some music for an A&R person, and in the background we literally heard it was just like a low drone and just a deep-doop every once in a while in a weird sound. And we left the meeting. We were like, what was that? Because at one point in the meeting, he said, I would sign this if I could.
It's like this ambient, like bizarre, like stuff that never would have sold in a million years.
That's right. And then we left the meeting thinking, God, we just totally missed that one, didn't we? I know we got a couple more questions coming in. Zan, hit us.
Right, next question's from Dahlia. Has COVID affected the number of the label's new artist acquisitions? If so, how so?
I don't get a sense of that currently. In terms of our business, generally it's been our management division, because nobody's touring currently, and that's a lot of artists management commission revenue. But on the recording side and publishing side, it feels like it's been pretty much business as usual. At least on the eOne side, again, we have a management client, eOne, that we signed to Island Records, kind of in the midst of all of this. We've got a number of other deals going. Now that I'm thinking about it, on the management side, there's a number of other record deals and business that's going on. So I don't think anybody's taking their foot off the gas.
No, in fact, I think it's probably the opposite, because as I start to think about it, as you know, I'm a part of a management company as well, and as you start to think about it, touring is going to, once that picks up, I mean, it's going to be gangbusters, isn't it? I mean, it's going to go wild, I think.
Yeah, and you looked at, there's a big Goldman Sachs report out this week that's still like super, super bullish about streaming and where that's going for the next 10 years. I think that was, sort of reassuring for music companies and music publishers through this. I think there was a bit of dip in terms of streaming numbers, but there hasn't really been a dip in subscriptions even through all of this, right? You would think people who are maybe losing their jobs or their pocketbook is getting stretched, they'd take a look at those subscriptions and maybe start canceling their Spotify or their Apple subscription, and that doesn't seem to be happening on a significant level, which is encouraging.
Totally. Thank you. I think we had a few more questions, right, Zan?
Yeah. This one's from Devin. What are the most recent songs you've heard that gave you the tingle, or a song that you knew would have an impact on first listen?
We work with a jazz R&B artist, Georgia Ann Muldrow, who's actually lives in Vegas, works a lot on the West Coast. She has a jazz project called Joy Tea. There's records on there that I think are fantastic. Not released yet, but I love that one a lot.
And what's something that came out that you were like, oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind?
I love that. I'm addicted to that Pow Fu song, that kid from Vancouver. I think it's called Deathbed. It's like the 5th biggest streaming song in the world probably today on Spotify, but still like relatively under the radar because it hasn't had kind of a public profile kind of zeitgeist moment, but there's a lot of people listening to that song.
To go to the Spotify thing, like how important is like a New Music Friday for you when you're launching an artist?
I say, I mean, it gets back to my earlier point. There's 1,000 things, and New Music Friday, probably better to have that than not to have it. But it's one link in the chain, in addition to the other 999 things.
I mean, we have a single that just came out with our artist last week. We didn't get New Music Friday, and he's done 250,000 streams on Spotify in his first week anyway without New Music Friday. So we actually thought that looked like a pretty big success. An artist named Jake Miller with a song called. So yeah. Yeah,
well, and you look at that, it's like, well, if you didn't get it on this song, but you're able to organically build and the people decide with their ears, the next song is New Music Friday.
Totally.
And then if you keep building this thing, New Music Friday becomes a guarantee after a while as you've just established yourself.
And then you move higher on the list, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like to your video game example. I like that one. Like it's levels, and I think you need to keep being productive and keep putting out music. Nobody should be going away for a year and a half and sort of thinking it all over and writing songs forever. It's like if you get a spot, you want to take that spot and sort of slingshot off the back of that, and kind of keep catapulting off the back of your sort of highest achievement on your previous record.
That's so true. And I think that some people don't realize that. I think that a lot of people get a bit paralyzed by, when do I release something? What do I release next? How do I do, that? But I think you're right. I think if you can create a constant flow of content coming out, and you build those artists up, like, I know that our mutual friend Larry Wade was on with us a couple weeks ago, and he was one of those people that said, if you have 5 fans, service those 5 fans, and those 5 fans become 10 fans, and so on and so forth. You just build and leverage as you on your way up, right?
Yeah, I'm 100%. I'm also very, we end up having a lot of discussions with artists about album versus song projects. A lot of artists want to kind of get to that album and have that out into the world, especially if they haven't put a full album out yet. But you got to be patient and focus on the song event and doing what you can around each one. Because once you get to the album and the body of work, it's like people are just not listening to full albums these days. They're not. Those extra songs become you're wasting work that way.
I think the concept would be write for an album, but release for a single, right? And then by the time that the album comes out, you have 6 singles or 7 singles that have impacted. Okay, there you go. There's your album. Congratulations.
100%.
Yeah. I think we got a couple more questions. What else we got there, Zan?
Yeah, this is from Rachel. What do you think the value of a hard copy CD is today? Is there still a demand for physical copies? And do you think artists will eventually be pushed to phase out CDs and rely only on streaming?
I think we're getting to that point currently. Unfortunately, this pandemic has really pushed everything to the edge. We've seen a decline with respect to physical for the last 4 or 5 years. For us, from an eOne perspective, it's probably about 15% of our business currently, and it's still important and still matters. But it's getting tougher and tougher if you're going to focus efforts. It's definitely in that sort of streaming digital world today.
You see vinyl surpassing CDs again?
Yeah, I think so. Just because it's a piece of art and more of a collector's item than a CD would be. We do quite a bit of vinyl, kind of direct to fan right now.
I love it. A couple more questions. Thank you for your time, Chris. It's been awesome. This has really been so enlightening and inspiring. And I feel a bit selfish because Chris and I have had these philosophical conversations for 27 years, and now you guys get to sort of be a part of them. So, Zan, hit us. There's a couple more I know, and then get it moving.
Well, this one's from Laura. Do you have any advice for entertainment lawyers who are in the early stages of their career?
It depends. I mean, there's 2 different routes, I think, for I'm assuming like entertainment lawyers or music lawyers. One is you mentor under someone senior if you can get that job, and take whatever job you can to kind of get in the door, so that you're doing producer agreements, mixer agreements day to day. These places are factories. They need worker bees like that to do that kind of work. I didn't have that option. Toronto is actually a very limited music market. There's, a handful of music lawyers to start with. So finding a job in that regard was difficult. I started working and building a practice myself under a senior lawyer, but it was more on a rev share, to be honest, as opposed to some sort of guaranteed salary, and really pounded the pavement. I mean, in my day, it was about, I was in clubs 6 nights a week, going out to see bands and networking with people, and even my apprenticeship while I was in the band put me within the mix of the industry. Today, I think there's a lot more that you can do. I mean, I know there's attorneys that do this, especially young ones that are trolling the internet, and they're doing research the way record companies are doing research, because you'll reach out to these bands and it's the same 5 lawyers that it's like, oh, wow, this is great. Like 3 days ago, this attorney called me and now they're my lawyer. I'm just like, they've never seen you play live. They've never, listened to more than one song. But if an artist is sort of spiking a little bit in algorithmically, they've got an attorney, and there's a group of young ones that are out there kind of hustling that way. You can track people down on Instagram and message them directly and bring them into the fold. Everybody loves to say they have a lawyer.
Well, I think there's also a philosophy amongst artists that they're like, oh, Cardi B's attorney is my attorney. And and to me, especially when I look at the way you created your career, it was real. You had a real talent. I mean, I'm not just gassing you up here. You had a real talent to actually do the work. It wasn't like there was no relying on I'm going to sort of ride somebody's coattails. And so I always thought that was something that was so impressive about how you were entrepreneuristic. I don't know, that's not a real word, but you know what I'm saying. The sort of entrepreneurial nature of how you approach things. And to go back again to what we said, I remember getting a call out of the blue saying, I was just talking to Robert Ott, and he said that they're thinking about signing you to a record deal. My name is Chris Taylor, and if you don't have an attorney, I'd like to talk to you. And that was kind of the first conversation, if you recall. And then of course, like I said, and I always loved that sort of spirit that you had. And even now as you're running eOne, it's the same thing, right? You're always going, how am I going to push this? But I agree, learning, and kind of like as a record producer, I had the same thing. I never apprenticed to anybody. I kind of had to learn it on my own, as you know, Chris, because we were there together. But I think learning and having mentors and having coaches and people that can help you. You've been a coach to me, yeah. But that's a great question. I think we got a couple more. I see one from Dan and one from Reiner. So Zan,
I would say again, just to the attorney, it's hustling and having the door open for everybody and hustling and finding those clients. Eventually you have to, I always call it, eventually you have to find your Nelly Furtado. You've got to have that marquee artist. So when you're in a discussion and you're up against another lawyer, you've got some client you can put on the table and say, look, I do the work for this artist, and it makes an impression with them. And then you have to have your Nelly Furtado, and then you have to keep your Nelly Furtado, and you have to work extremely hard, because you can bet that every lawyer in Hollywood and New York is looking to steal them off you every single day.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing. Not that I changed your life at all, but I remember one of the reasons why we used to do those breakfasts. If you remember, you used to say to me, if we have breakfast, I won't have to charge you for my time because I have to eat. And do you remember we used to say that? And I just always was like, this guy is friggin' rocks, because you just felt like a real believer. And I know that it's fun to say Nelly Furtado, it's fun to say Drake, it's fun to talk about all your successes, but I also know that you've been literally an advocate for those people, and you've gone to the wall for them. So that's me blowing you up a little bit. That's a great question. I think we got two more questions, Ann, right?
Yep. This one's from Jay. What is the best way for a recording studio to build partnerships with record labels and A&R?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of some real world examples on my part. I mean, I know some successfully run studios. I would say, it's not dissimilar to the lawyer discussion we just had. Have the door open, be ready to do some stuff pro bono to get some stories going through the studio. Even as an attorney, it's like, a lot for the first 3 or 4 years, clients I had, they had no money. 3 Days Grace had no money. Nelly Furtado had no money. It's like, hey, yeah, it's like, you know what? I'm going to help you. I think you're great. Let's go do something great together. And then as you achieve, then it gets easier and easier to get marquee clients and marquee studios. The more success you get, the more success you get. So you've got to get started, and don't be so stringent about fees and costs and things like that early days to kind of get the credits up.
Yeah, look at it as an investment in yourself. The money you're not making is an investment in yourself.
That's it.
Yeah, love it. Excellent advice. A couple more.
Cool. This one's from Reiner. How do you see Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google impacting future sales and opportunities for writers?
I'm an optimist generally, and my general view is I see them affecting writers in a positive way. I know Facebook in particular is moving more affirmatively into some sort of music-based strategy. We see them out in the market hiring people that would indicate that they're going to develop their music strategy. A place like Netflix is producing more and more content on the film and TV side. All of that needs music. So there's a growth opportunity there across all of it.
I mean, when you look at, as you mentioned, you look at the thousands of slots eOne fills, extrapolate that and apply that formula against, the universe of music users.
Yeah.
I mean, literally almost exponential, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I heard the other day in a meeting there are currently like 500 plus television shows on the air right now. And every single one of them uses, whether it's library music or needle drop or composer, they're all using music.
I mean, again, just one more time, that's why we're kind of trying to build this open source library for people, so we can allow our base of MDIIO users to actually put themselves into the path of opportunity. So if you want to hear about it, we're going to do a little group. Just enter your email address on the right side. I think we have one more question. Chris, you've been more than generous with your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We have one more question, right, Sam?
Yeah. This one's from Dan. Are you going to be doing more virtual online music events since virtual conferencing has been used so heavily because of COVID-19? I think that might be for Justin, but also, Chris, if you're doing any.
I feel like Chris can probably really speak to this from the label management, all of the integrations you have.
Yeah, I have all our virtual concerts and activities in my calendar in gray, and they're all over the calendar currently. I think frustratingly, I think artists are still trying to figure out a monetization strategy around this and how it really does substitute for real live touring income, and I don't think we're there. But artists, as well as needing to make money, I think they need to connect with people, and we're seeing them, doing that every day. We're doing, sort of virtual in-house concerts as well, and the whole day is sort of filled with Teams conference calls and everything else. So I've enjoyed doing this. This has been fun. I'll do more of these.
Well, I mean, we've been so fortunate to have some pretty amazing and smart and inspiring people, and you have certainly added to that list. We've been very lucky, and thankfully my friends have all been very generous with their time to come and speak to our community of people. And Chris, you're certainly no exception to that. And we've been very lucky to kind of grow up through this business together in many ways. And I've always been so proud of the success that you've been able to accomplish for yourself. And it's really impressive. And I'll act like your mom here for a minute, but we're very proud of you.
Well, Justin, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm proud of you as well. And I don't know if it's a secret. I'm an early supporter of the platform, and I've been really impressed with you and Curtis and the group and everything that you guys have been doing around it. So, congratulations. You're not even not just an incredibly creative guy, but your business and tech mind is inspiring as well.
You could have said handsome. I mean, my mother listens.
Which box is she here?
Actually, she's not. She just moved today, so she's not with us today. Well, that sounds terrible. She's
Mom.
I just want to thank Curtis, my partner in MDIIO. I want to thank Zan for being in the cloud and taking care of all the questions. Of course, James Best, who is the man behind the emails that you guys are getting and keeping us all on the path. And of course, Chris, again, I look forward to seeing you and Margaret and hugging it out and breaking bread together sometime in 2023, I hope. But really appreciate you, and go back and run your globally multinational, multi-vertical company, and we'll just be hanging out here in LA. So thank you guys so much. Follow us on all of our socials. Guys. We are MDIIO, and see you next week, you guys. Thank you so much. Tell everybody about us. Bye.